Today on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, Nick Whalen and I are going to do our FOMO cast, the guys that we wish we drafted but didn't for various reasons. Stay tuned. Everybody, welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the folks from Bettor Fantasy, Rival Fantasy, and Vivid Seats. That's right, the regular season is upon us, so Vivid Seats always chimes in here. We're going to do a good read for them a little bit later on. Nick Whalen, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. We're almost there. You know, we've been saying that the last few weeks, but we are now, 3 days away, a matter of hours away from Lions Chiefs on Thursday night. Really fired up to keep previewing week one. This week, we'll have a full slate of podcasts, some videos coming out, talking about the Circa Million contest. That, of course, starts this week as well. We got a bunch of Sirius XM shows throughout the week. And then, I love nothing more, Jeff, than getting to the weekend and just doing absolutely nothing other than watching football from, noon my time until the end of Sunday Night Football. You get in this fantastic routine where, Saturday's college football. Sunday, of course, is the NFL. Monday, you got Monday Night Football. Really, all you have to do is make it through Tuesday and Wednesday each week, and you're back to football on Thursday. And then, Friday, you always have something going on. So I'm excited to get back into that routine of football, basically just ruling my life.
Spoken like a man who doesn't have any kids yet. It is true. But it is great to get into that routine. The Sunday is in particular there. I may have had to sacrifice college football at the altar, but that's okay. Northwestern's not worth sacrificing, much for anyhow. So that's a fine give up for me. I have one draft left, but it's not even. It's kind of a smaller draft. So all my major ones are done. I did the NFFC primetime over the weekend. We can talk about that a little bit, but this is also kind of a good time to kind of look back at what we've done so far, take a record, and kind of where are my draft regrets? Where am I the guys that I wish I had some pieces of that I don't. And I thought we'd do that exercise for both of us before we look at the NFFC primetime, before we look at your NFFC draft, before we look at week one. I thought we'd just kind of jump right into it there. So why don't I go ahead and start because I introduced the concept. Nick, I don't have any Bijan Robinson this year. None. Zero. Generational back. The next Adrian Peterson. I have none of them so far this year.
So I still have a few more important drafts coming up. I have my NFFC later tonight, in fact, right after the Sirius XM show. I'll be hopping on and doing that. I have, kind of my two home league drafts. One of those is going on concurrently with the NFFC draft, and then one is later this week. Ooh. So the door is not closed on me adding Bijan Robinson, but I've been staying away too, Jeff. I've got him in a couple of best ball leagues, but, the stakes are a little bit different there. You're diversifying more. You're kind of firing off drafts left and right. You're not putting, hours of thought into each pick. And of course, the stakes are lower in a best ball league. But, I'll ask you this. What has kept you away from Bijan Robinson? I'm sure you've had opportunities to take him, but, what has deterred you from Bijan Robinson, and who have you found yourself taking instead?
So, and I want to introduce one thing. This doesn't count best ball for me because I think best ball, You can own everybody. You can roster everybody. It really takes some work to not roster people. If you're a volume best ball player, it really takes a lot of work to not roster someone. It must mean you really truly. There's no wish you would have had him sort of thing because you could find a way to get him.
Right.
In the case of Bijan, it's it's other players I liked better. Whether it was the wide receivers towards the end of the first round. I'll find myself on Saturday. I did CD Lamb in the NFFC primetime there. I wanted to get that receiver start there, so I went with him over Bijan, which I could have had that there. Benson says I have a well-known anti-Falcon bias. Not true. And the fact is, I have some fear. Hey, Arthur Smith is going to optimize Bijan to the hilt. You got that great run blocking offensive line. I am, and what if he really truly is the next Peterson? I'm going to totally regret that. It's that, and I like Nick Chubb better a little bit too. So those are the two things. Either get the receiver, draft slot, or I went with Nick Chubb. That is going to be that could be a sticking point. Chubb versus Bijan. I mean, I could lose that one in a landslide. It's possible.
It's possible, but I wouldn't say it's likely that it's a landslide loss, right? And
Right.
I think the fear in PPR leagues is that that's where Bijan Robinson really shines, and that's where Nick Chubb perhaps loses a little bit of value. Although there is still belief that it's like maybe this is the year that Nick Chubb starts catching passes. I don't know if I'm fully in on that belief. I know our guy John McKechnie is like we've seen it at Georgia. Like deep down, this guy we talk about him like he can't catch passes, but he actually can. They just haven't really asked him to do so. I for the most part, I've been avoiding Bijan as well, and it's avoiding's maybe too strong of a term. It's not like I don't want him on my team, but it's still too much of an unknown to me. There's still too many rumblings of okay, what kind of split is Tyler Algier actually going to get in this offense early on, and I still kind of want to see it a little bit more with Desmond Ridder. I know I've said over and over on this pod and on the radio show that I kind of like the Falcons to be a sneaky decent team due in large part to how easy their schedule is, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I think their offense is going to be steamrolling teams every single week. So if Bijan Robinson breaks out as an incredible rookie season, which we know he's capable of doing, yeah, we're going to look back and we're going to have a little bit of FOMO, but passing on him to add someone like CeeDee Lamb or draft Stephon Diggs or wait until round 2 and take Nick Chubb, like I think these are all pretty defensible decisions.
Yeah, and by the way, when we go through our respective lists, and I have about 5 or 6. They're almost always running backs or quarterbacks. I had a harder time finding a receiver I didn't get that I wanted but didn't get. But yeah, it's kind of a scary thing. He could just absolutely kill it. Uncle Ted says Bijan Barkley is the ultimate running back stack. If you do if you do robust running back, you go running back to start. I mean, you can do that at the end of a lot of drafts, and I've seen it. And there is kind of like some wistfulness looking at like, ooh, that could be a lot of fun. But then I look at the receivers I'd have to roster, and I feel a little bit more squeamish. Whereas I feel pretty good about adding some running backs in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round. So that's one of the reasons why I've gone that route. Who's your number one player that you regret not drafting so far?
So I kind of looked at this as just like, all right, I made a list of players who notable players who I just don't have on a ton of teams, and there are not a ton where I've been like, man, I really wish I had more of them because I've done enough drafts that if I wanted them, I could get them. But somebody to me who stuck out, and I can't really put my finger on why I've been avoiding him. I think I just like some other players in the range a little bit more. Is Amon-Ra St. Brown. I have no exposure to St. Brown. I just haven't really been willing to pay the price. I feel like in some drafts that I've done the last couple of weeks, I mean, he's starting to go 8, 9, 10. ADP wise, he's still going just outside round 1 on average. But in the last week, Jeff, I mean, there's multiple drafts where he's gone in the top 5 at the NFFC. And I don't know if it's just my general skepticism of the Lions franchise, if it's that I feel like I'm a little bit lower on this team than the general consensus is. But I understand the case for Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think he's very, very clearly the number 1 guy in this offense. But I think we're being a little presumptuous when it comes to the upside for this Lions team this season. I don't really know that they got a whole lot better year over year. I think they're relying on a lot of unproven players. I'm still somewhat skeptical of Dan Campbell as a head coach. I think he's a good character for the league. I think he's somebody that I enjoy following, not necessarily the guy I would want leading a team that I care about or a team that I root for. So I've been finding myself going CeeDee Lamb more often than not, AJ Brown. If I'm picking at 10, 11, 12, Saquon Barkley, of course, Devontae Adams, not so much, but Garrett Wilson, Nick Chubb, those guys have all been in the mix for me over Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I wish I could provide a better reason. I'm just a little skeptical of this Lions team. And I think I'm kind of lumping him into that.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that because my next guy is a Lion. We'll get to him in a second, but St. Brown went 8th in my overall NFFC primetime. AJ Brown went 7th. Gibbs went even earlier than that. It was an odd draft where, I mean, I wanted Lamb at 10. I thought I might get him. I actually think the choices I had, and obviously the Cup news breaking as it did on Friday with the setback kind of changed things a little bit. Everybody else got pushed up a spot, and Cup dropped to the 2nd round of mine, and I saw him drop to the 3rd and others, and honestly, I wouldn't even take Cooper Kupp in the 3rd round right now.
Nope.
He is not a FOMO guy. I do not regret not taking Kupp. I mean, he could be awesome, but I do not regret it for the price that he was going for. Just the out-of-town specialist with the hamstring injury. I mean, come on. That is, for me, that's super scary. So St. Brown on the merits, I mean, yeah, he could rack up so many targets. He's good, and I know the touchdowns were an anomaly. I know he's going to have more touchdowns this year. I have some exposure to him, but not a ton. I like all those back of the first round wide receivers, except I like them all over Cup. I think that's the thing I've been doing a lot at. So I can't touch Cup where he's going. Maybe in the fourth round I would do it, but he's not there almost often. My next guy, I alluded to it there. I don't have any Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm avoiding the shiny new toy again. Third round price on Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, he could be amazing. We're hearing, we heard a report over the weekend. He'll be used in ways that people don't anticipate. That could be spun two different ways, by the way. That could mean, okay, he's going to catch a ton of passes. He's going to line up as a receiver because they don't have a pure number 2 right now with no Jamison Williams. That also could mean that, hey, David Montgomery is going to get more carries. He's going to get that Jamal Williams role, and Gibbs is going to get the DeAndre Swift role. Do you want last year's DeAndre Swift in the third round? I don't, and I'm scared about that a little bit. But I know they took him in the first round. They love him. He could be a dynamic pass catcher. I don't have any Jahmyr Gibbs this year.
Neither do I. If you're a listener of our SiriusXM show, you're probably not surprised to hear this. To me, he's not a FOMO player for me. He's just somebody that I don't want a piece of at cost.
Yeah.
And I love the player. I loved him at Alabama. Super exciting player. I totally understand the long-term upside. I think there's some kind of Alvin Kamara type of trajectory that he could be on. But, to take a player like that, sometimes you have to grab him like early in round 3 if you really want Jahmyr Gibbs. And I'm not paying that price, man. I think, the way I framed it, over the last few weeks is if you're taking Jahmyr Gibbs at, say, the 32nd overall pick in a draft, like he has to have, to me, the best case scenario rookie season just to return value, not, let alone exceed value. I think to me, there's not a world in which Jahmyr Gibbs finishes as like a top 20 overall fantasy player this season. I think that's just asking too much of this guy in his rookie season. And there's so much talent at the top of the league that's just a high bar to clear for anybody, let alone a rookie. If he was going in, like more of the Breece Hall, Aaron Jones territory, if you could get him in round 4 or round 5, I would be all over it. I have not been willing to pay the price on him throughout the entire draft process. And, I kind of thought maybe at some point that price would come down. It is not.
Yeah. He's running back 9 in the primetime draft so far. He is going at pick 30.69. So yeah, it's early. We're talking early to mid third round is where he's going. Just behind Josh Jacobs, ahead of Ramondre Stevenson, who's almost dropping to the 4th. Same with Najee Harris. For me, I can say I qualified as a FOMO because I could see him being like Edgerrin James in his rookie year, where he could really be that awesome still. The fact that they spent the draft capital as they did suggests to me that they have big designs on him. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, it is, there's a lot of rookies is where I find that I do get the FOMO because, I mean, let's face it, it's the unknown. We all want to steer into that a lot more. So for me, still a FOMO, but I get it. For other people, it's a logical decision. How about you? Who's your FOMO number 2?
So my FOMO number 2 is Jalen Hurts. The quarterback who I go into every draft saying, man, I really want to get Jalen Hurts. And I come out of every draft with like Justin Herbert or, at times Trevor Lawrence or Dak Prescott or Geno Smith. I in my mind, I want to pay the price for Jalen Hurts, but when push comes to shove and I'm, on the clock in, the second round or sometimes even the third round, depending on your scoring settings, I find myself being like, can I really pass up on Chris Olave? Can I really pass up on Derrick Henry, who I'm still all in on? If Calvin Ridley or T. Higgins are there in round 3, like I kind of have to go that route. So I've mentally trying to, get myself over that hurdle and say, okay, it's okay to draft a player like Jalen Hurts in round 2 or 3. We saw what he did last season. He barely played in the fourth quarter. Everything he did should be replicable. Quarterbacks deserve to be drafted higher in a lot of formats this season. And yet I kind of continue to end up shopping in kind of the lower end of that top tier of quarterback.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'll be talking about quarterback momentarily as well. I'm willing to shop in that range. And the thing is, I have paired AJ Brown and Hurts together a couple of times. And I like doing that. Once in a non-overall contest format, even still too. I do like that combo. I think it's worth it. And so luckily I have that. But though, I don't often shop in that top tier. It's often, but I do more often than not get a top 8. There are some leagues where I haven't, and
Yeah.
It's a little scary when you don't get a top 8 quarterback after what happened last year, but I get it there a little bit. So yeah, Hurts could be a first round player. I mean, he was last year until he got hurt at the end of the year. But that's the thing about quarterbacks is that I'll get another and I'll be pretty close. Well, pretty close wouldn't happen as much after the top 8 last year. So that's the thing. It's a little interesting there. Before we move on and talk about our next FOMO players, let's share a quick note from one of our sponsors, our Rival Fantasy. If you're looking for a place to play head-to-head fantasy football games without the huge tournaments, salary caps, or complicated game types, then Rival Fantasy is where you want to play this NFL season. From a twist on a classic game with Fantasy Bingo, where players generate a lineup to complete achievements and get bingo, to head-to-head fantasy challenges, where you'll pick which of 2 players will score more fantasy points. This is the best of fantasy sports. For the 2023 NFL season, Rival Fantasy is offering new users a $200 deposit match, plus a $25 first play voucher. Rival Fantasy is so confident you'll love the experience, they're giving you money to play out of the gate. Experience the future of fantasy sports on Rival Fantasy and become a rival today. Also, we're on the Blue Wire Network. Here are a couple of their ads. All right, this is FOMOcast. Let's keep rolling on. And guys that we wish we drafted but didn't. You mentioned Jalen Hurts. I didn't get any of the best player in the game, Patrick Mahomes. I don't have any of them. And it wasn't like I was like, no, I don't. I'm down on him this year. You can't. It's not like you say, well, he doesn't have Tyreek Hill. We're gonna have to ding him this year. No, we saw what the life is like without Tyreek Hill, and it was just fine. And they've invested in wide receiver in the draft too. I mean, they have good young talent there. It's a question of can they keep him on the field and all that. I have Hurts. I don't have any Mahomes. Maybe it's because I always wanted to pair him with Kelsey when I did get him, and I only got Kelsey once, and someone snagged Mahomes before me. Very naughty of them to do that, by the way. How dare they do that? But I just don't have any Mahomes, and sucks not having the best player in the game, the most fun player in football to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say the same thing about Mahomes as I did Hurts, right? I mean, those guys are interchangeable to me. In a lot of leagues, you'll see Mahomes usually go a few picks higher. Josh Allen is in this conversation as well. And like I said, Hurts is my favorite of those 3. And if I've been targeting him and not getting him, I can tell you that I haven't been getting Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes either. I mean, in an NFFC draft, you got to be taking Mahomes probably in the top 15, which again, I'm just not really willing to do. As we've alluded to, you and I love picking in that 10, 11, 12 range. If you're in a 14 team league, even extend that out to 13, 14. I want to double tap early in round 2, and then I will want that high pick in round 3 with third round reversal. And I really want to come out of that. If we're talking those first 3 rounds, I want to come out of that with either 3 receivers. I'm fine with that, or at least 2 receivers and a running back. So, that's it's pretty easy to see, Jeff, why I keep ending up with Justin Herbert because he's usually sitting there for me in the 4th round after I do some solidifying at running back and receiver through the first 3. And last season, Mahomes and Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen, I suppose, were kind of on their own level as quarterbacks. So it does make sense that they typically go a round or 2 ahead of that next tier. You look at Jalen Hurts to Geno Smith, for example. That was 7 fantasy points per game worth of difference. You multiply that by 16 or 17, you do the math, and you can see why that makes sense. But to me, this season, Mahomes versus Herbert, yes, chances are Patrick Mahomes finishes ahead of Justin Herbert. I don't think it's that big of a gap. I'm high enough on Justin Herbert that I think he narrows that gap, and Mahomes maybe beats him by, let's say, 2 fantasy points per game, which is a big, big difference compared to how separate they were last season. So I love Mahomes. I respect the hell out of Mahomes. Obviously, it's nothing against him, but I just think that the gap between those top 3 quarterbacks and Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, I don't think that gap will be as cavernous this year.
Yeah. I tend to think you're right about that. I think we get caught up in what happened last year as the script for the upcoming year way too often. And I think there is still a trend of separation. I just don't think it'll be as extreme. Noteworthy, in my primetime draft on Saturday, 36 quarterbacks taken in the first 37 picks. There's a team 2 in this one, and remember, it's 3rd round reversal. Team 2 started off Chase and Higgins, all set to take Burrow in the 3rd round, and he got sniped 2 picks before him there. And he's just apoplectic. I think he pivoted to Herbert, and then another team took Jackson at 37. And it's just okay, it's on. So I ended up getting T-Law in the 5th round still, and I'm happy with that. It was like I kind of had that decision: do I get a top 8 guy, or do I go ahead and get another receiver, or get that second running back? And it was a tough call, but I think I'm happy with T-Law there. But it was interesting to see. Okay, Herbert's not sitting there for you in the 4th round. He's not, let alone the 5th in this one there. So just, and the live events tend to be a little bit different also than the online ones there. Okay, your number 3 FOMO guy.
Tony Pollard. Oh, yeah. I have not ended up with as much Tony Pollard as I would like. I am certainly going into tonight's NFFC draft hoping that changes. Like I said, I still have a couple more important leagues going off this week, so the book is not closed on landing some of these players. But with Pollard, it almost feels like you have to kind of be in the perfect draft slot to grab him. You have to be picking like, I don't know, 7th, 8th, or 9th, or you feel like you're reaching, taking him over Nick Chubb. Like, I'm always going to take Chubb over Pollard, so maybe that's part of the issue. Is I have a ton of Nick Chubb. I would slightly lean Saquon over Pollard, although to me that case is a little bit closer than the ADP would indicate. I mean, Tony Pollard last season was like the RB, I think 6 in terms of average fantasy points per week, and then you also factor in that Ezekiel Elliott scored 12 touchdowns last season, and virtually all of those came from like 3 yards or shorter. So even if Tony Pollard is not getting 100% of that workload, if he gets half of those, you could kind of imagine where that fantasy value goes. So, there is, I think, some concern about the injury, coming back from a severe injury late last season. How does he hold up as the clear number 1 guy? But I don't think they really have that new Ezekiel Elliott, right? There's not a touchdown vulture to me really on this roster. So as long as Tony Pollard stays healthy, I think there's a really good chance that he ends up being a first round value. I just have not been in the right position in enough drafts to grab Tony Pollard. I've been picking 10, 11, 12 a lot. And like I said, that's usually where I'm getting, CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, Nick Chubb, Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson more often than Adams. So if you're picking in the middle of a draft and you have an opportunity to get Pollard with the 16, 17, 18th pick coming around in round 2, absolutely advise doing that.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think that's right. I think that Pollard is one of those guys for sure that I think I have him maybe in one league. And, you said the Chubb versus Pollard thing, it resonates with me. I did that very, very same thing on Saturday. And, or I went with Garrett Wilson as my second receiver. I got that. Especially because I'm starting to see that receiver inflation. Maybe I play too much NFFC, but you start to see those yellow stickers in the second round. You're like, I can't. If I take Pollard here, I'm going to get screwed at wide receiver, and so I start going that route a lot more often. So yeah, it totally resonates with me. Pollard could go crazy, but keep in mind he is coming off a broken leg too. There is the Mike McCarthy issue there. It's not going to be as fast-paced of an offense this year. What if that drags down the entire offense? Probably won't, but he probably will be completely worthy. He could be the 1.1 next year. I mean, the upside is there. So that's why it definitely qualifies as FOMO. I get the reasons why you pass on him, and I also get like, oh man, I really regret this. I could be wrong on this one here. I don't have enough exposure to him either. I'm concerned about that one.
Yeah, he's the guy to me that fits this definition of what we're trying to throw out here the most, right? Like there's other players where you could make a case against them, but like he is one guy that I've gone into pretty much every draft wanting to get. And like I said, if you're not drafting in the right slot, you just have no chance to get him.
Yeah. That's for sure. And there's a concern about it. Does he play 17 games? I get that. 16 for our purposes, but that is a concern. All right. Wide receivers. Be honest, Nick. I got almost all the receivers I wanted, at least once or twice. But I also make a priority of drafting them, so it was harder to come up with one here. But I do have one, and that's George Pickens. I do not have any George Pickens in my life, and when he high points that ball and roofs somebody, I might regret it. If he gets 10 touchdowns and Deontay gets 2, I'm going to be feeling pretty bad about that one there. I don't have any George Pickens, and he is not getting. He's starting to get expensive too. I saw Benson make a comment in the comments in the chat that you might be able to get him at a reasonable price, but I'm telling you, his price is going up. He's in the I'd say like in the 50s. I'm starting to see him 50s and
Mhm.
60s, and he used to be able to get him like 75 to 80.
Yeah, he's got a min pick of 36 in the last week at the NFFC. So, of course, that is an outlier, but it also speaks to the fact that there are people out there that view him as a third, fourth round upside type of player. I have very few shares of George Pickens as well, mostly because I just haven't been willing to pay that price. I don't love having to jump ADP sometimes by a round or two for a player like George Pickens. And I'm looking at our SiriusXM host league draft. Like he went ahead of Mike Williams. He went ahead of Christian Kirk. He went ahead of Michael Pittman, which I'm actually fine with. Well ahead of Deontay Johnson in that league as well. So I love the player in George Pickens. I do think that there's a chance that he is a more impactful real life player than he is fantasy player this season. I mean, you got to keep in mind Pittsburgh had 12 passing touchdowns as a team last season, and that's not happening again. I mean, they could double that number, but it's 24 is still not that many. So I think. I think this offense will progress, but I don't think it's all of a sudden a 38 passing touchdown offense, and 11 of those are in the hands of George Pickens. So a lot of the problems, a lot of the limitations that he faced last season, I think will likely still be there. There's low key kind of some competition for targets, right? You have a target monster in Deontay Johnson. You have a good tight end in Pat Freiermuth. You have a running back in Najee Harris who can catch the ball. So I really like George Pickens a lot. I think drafting him in the 50s to me is a mistake. Now, this time next year, I think we'll be talking about him perhaps in a different context. But I think there's a little bit of wishful thinking going along with George Pickens. Again, love the player, but don't love the cost.
Yeah, and that's typically been my approach. I do acknowledge that the possibility I could be wrong on this one here. And we know development isn't linear. I mean, Kenny Pickett wasn't even the start at the beginning of the year last year. He had a bad offensive line last year. It's year 2 versus year 1, and both for he and for Pickens. I could see an explosion as he could be one of those guys we're drafting in the 3rd round next year. And if so, I'm going to regret not being there for that there. So he is FOMO for me, and I do not have him anywhere.
Well, he's such a fun player that he's a FOMO guy as well, right? I mean, like you totally see the upside. So I think you're spot on there. I'll throw out another receiver quickly, Calvin Ridley. Love Calvin Ridley. Was getting a decent amount of him, especially in best balls, 3 months ago, and then it felt like every time you check ADP, he's up one spot per day, and now you really have to pay an exorbitant cost to go out and get the Jags' number 1 receiver. Going on average with the 26th pick right now in NFFC leagues. Still a fairly wide range. Sometimes he's gone as early as 13 in the last week. He's gone as late as 46. So, there is still, I think, somewhat of a range there. But in general, I mean, he's made quite the ascent, passing up guys like Amari Cooper, Deebo Samuel, Keenan Allen, DK Metcalf in ADP. I mean, he's essentially pulled even with T. Higgins. He's kind of in that Chris Olave, Devontae Smith tier as well. So I love Calvin Ridley. Of course, I want Calvin Ridley to have the greatest Jacksonville Jaguars receiving season of all time. But it's gotten to the point where it's just tougher to land him, right? I mean, he's one of those guys where everybody seemingly is going out of their way to get Calvin Ridley, and I'm not even totally out on the cost. I think it could be justified. If this offense is as good as a lot of people think it will be, I don't think taking him, midway through round 2 is all that crazy, or early in round 3 is all that crazy at all. But you have to kind of seek him out in drafts. He's not somebody who's ever going to fall to you at this point.
That's 100% right. And he's one of those guys that I used to get. Calvin Ridley, we used to go in the 4th or 5th round at the start of draft season. Mm-hmm. Now he's ended the 2nd, and he and Chris Olave, I think, are the helium guys. And the push on wide receivers just keeps getting crazier and crazier. And the Kupp, Cooper Kupp's situation is even exacerbating that problem too. Because if you don't want to take Kupp at the end of the 1st, beginning of the 2nd, or anywhere in the 2nd, it's like, okay, where am I going to get my wide receiver? There's been 42 primetime drafts now in the NFFC, and that's the $1,750 entry fee. So people are paying good money for that. Average pick for Ridley is wide receiver 14. Right at that 1-2, that the end of the 2nd round. I was going to say 2-3 turn, but it's not 2-3 turn. It's just the end of the 2nd round because the 3rd round reversal. Range of 13 to 31. God bless those people who got him in the 3rd round, because that's becoming increasingly rare. What I'm finding now that, like, when I drafted on Saturday, I had the 10 spot, so I'm going 10, I'm going 15, and then I'm going 27. And I was like, okay, Ridley would be amazing there, or Olave. Well, Olave never happened. Olave hasn't made it to 27 once in those 42 drafts so far. Devonta Smith has made it there one time out of 42 drafts. Ridley, I think, just a couple of times. So DK Metcalf is now my guy. There, I'm getting at that spot instead. Higgins every once in a while, but Higgins was gone, I think, in this draft. I know he was gone because he went at the team 2 at the end of the second round. And then if you don't get Metcalf, then you're like, okay, do I push up Keenan Allen now? At one point, I was out on Keenan Allen. Now I've found myself rostering him a couple of times because he's the guy that slips in some cases, but in the NFFC, he's rising. So it's really an interesting conundrum there. What to do with the wide receiver position? And really, oh my God, you nailed it there. He is a guy that's hard to roster. You had to get him early.
So how do you personally rank? Like, let's say you have the option between Higgins, Ridley, and Metcalf. How would you order those 3?
Higgins, Ridley, Metcalf.
I think I'd go that order.
I think I might go Ridley ahead of Higgins because I think Ridley will be the number 1 in Jacksonville. Yeah. And it's a shame. I would have loved to have gone Ridley with Lawrence in prime time there and get a little combo meal, but I didn't. Good story. But it's one of those where I think I'd go Ridley, Higgins, Metcalf. You could even, I'm pretty happy with. I put Metcalf and Higgins on the same tier though, same par. If I have to choose between them, I think I go Higgins just because I think the offense I believe in a little bit more. But keep in mind too that Seattle gets 2 games against Arizona. They get 2 games against the Rams, which I know that's Aaron Donald, but it's also no longer the same killer secondary. The Rams might be a sad sack team for all we know. I mean, they play in week 1, so we'll find out pretty quickly. But
I think it's likely that they will be a sad sack team, especially if Cooper Kupp, ends up missing a decent chunk of time to begin the year. I mean, they're walking such a thin line, even if he was healthy. They're one of those teams that they're kind of like the Titans to me, where it's like, all right, if everything goes your way, I guess you could see this team winning like 10 games and making the playoffs. But one key injury, one misstep, and this could go completely the other direction.
Yeah, I think that's right. I have one tight end FOMO guy, and it's where I wait on tight ends and I still get it wrong, and that is I don't get David Njoku, and I really wanted some. I think I needed to push him up into that like the end of that second tier as opposed to putting him in the commons pile, if you will, at the top of the commons pile. And it's tough to take a tight end in that spot. You've already waited that far. Do you kind of you almost have to kind of nudge him up a little bit. Tight end 11 in the prime time, but that's not the way it's worked out for me. Like he's gone ahead of Freiermuth and Kincaid in most of my drafts. Kind of have to put him around Ingram level. Now, in the prime time, I didn't have that issue because I was gifted Kyle Pitts at 99. I'd say gifted, maybe it's a Trojan horse, who knows? But that was 25 picks after ADP, and I didn't come into the draft planning to take Kyle Pitts there, but when you got to also have the flexibility to take it when a gift is given to you. But I don't have an Njoku, and I think he's a really good player.
So you got Pitts at 99? That is wild, man. Yes. I mean, that's like the second lowest that he's gone in any draft in the last week out of like 200 plus drafts. So that very well could be a Trojan horse, but I think at that point in the draft, you have to take that. It's not like you're grabbing him at pick 75. So that's impressive, and could be a huge boon for your team. I'm with you on Njoku. I haven't got a ton of them just because I'm usually drafting Pat Freiermuth. I actually have a decent amount of Evan Ingram as well. I have a keeper question for you, by the way, that we'll address at the end of the pod involving Evan Ingram. I have not really been shopping beyond the Ingram, Freiermuth, and Njoku tier. Like if I'm waiting on tight end, I'm almost always grabbing one of those guys. And, if that's my first tight end, then I'm grabbing someone like Juwan Johnson later on. Gerald Everett, I think, has a decent amount of upside, especially because I have Justin Herbert on so many teams, even Cole Kmet every now and then. But the FOMO tight end for me, Jeff, is the Calvin Ridley of tight ends this year, Darren Waller. I was a little bit skeptical initially when he landed with the New York Giants, and then it just felt like week to week, the helium was rising, the reports were overwhelmingly positive, and I think he has a pretty clear path now to being, obviously the starting tight end, but also the number 1 wide receiver for this team, or the number 1 pass catcher, however you want to phrase it. But like Calvin Ridley, I mean, his ADP has risen accordingly, and you now have to go into a draft, kind of framing your 3rd, 4th, 5th round pick around, all right, I want to make sure I get Darren Waller, because there's usually going to be somebody who's willing to reach for him. I mean, he's gone as early as the 2nd pick in the 2nd round over the last week in the NFFC. So obviously, I'm not recommending taking Darren Waller at like 25 or 26 overall. But you got to be cognizant. Again, unlike Kyle Pitts, there's not going to be a draft where he just like falls into your lap in the 70s.
Yeah, he is tight end 3 in the prime time, ahead of Hawkinson, ahead of Kittle, obviously ahead of Goddard, and Pitts is clearly number 7 now. And that's one thing. Pitts has dropped consistently. I think there's a rising amount of skepticism about him, which is why I was able to get him there. And that's why but that's what you're there for sometimes. But I'm with you on Waller, and I like the early draft price. I like a lot better, and because when you take that you're taking the third tight end, you're almost always doing it at the expense of wide receiver 3 or running back 2, and it's and if you already have a quarterback, that's tough to pull off. You either get the early tight end or you get the early quarterback. It's hard to do both.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that. And Waller to me is worth that risk, of kind of exposing yourself at another position. But yeah, you got to be aggressive if you want to land him. No question about that.
Yeah, for sure. So to summarize, here are our FOMO guys for Nick: Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jalen Hurts, Tony Pollard, Calvin Ridley, Darren Waller. For Jeff: Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Patrick Mahomes, George Pickens, and David Njoku. So those are ones that we wanted but did not get for whatever reason. We're going to take a look at week 1 in a second, but first we have to share a couple of advertising notes. I think we can agree that fantasy sports are awesome. So is daily fantasy and sports betting. That's why we have so many freaking accounts. What's not so awesome is going to a bunch of different apps to find the best odds and manage all your fantasy lineups. Enter Bettor Vision. That's Bettor Vision. Better, get it? Bettor Vision is the only app that syncs all your fantasy, DFS, and sportsbook accounts into one place. We only show you the best odds for every bet, so you'll always get the best value. And our dashboard is the only one-stop shop to track all of your fantasy matchups, DFS picks, and bets. Visit bettervision.us to download Bettor Vision today. Also, if you want to go to a game, Vivid Seats is back with us. Football's back, and so is Vivid Seats. Kick off the NFL season with Vivid Seats and score tickets to all the hottest matchups and biggest games of the year. Catch every pass, every tackle, and every heart-pounding play of your favorite team, live and in person. And with Vivid Seats rewards, now you will earn rewards with every single purchase. Each ticket you buy gets you closer to your reward. Just buy 10 tickets and simply cash in your credit toward your 11th ticket purchase. It's that easy. Plus, Vivid Seats is offering you $20 off your first $200 ticket purchase with code RotoWire. That's code ROTOWIRE. From the 50-yard line to the upper deck, Vivid Seats has great tickets for all the 2023 games that matter to you. Just visit vividseats.com or download the app today. I've personally used Vivid Seats multiple times. It works great. I've never had a problem with them. So, personal endorsement, I do recommend Vivid Seats if you're trying to get tickets to a game. Okay, Nick, we handled all of our FOMO guys. Let's talk about week 1. I don't think we need to go through every game. I think that would just be laborious, and we don't have the bandwidth or time for that. So instead, I wanted to you to kind of highlight 2 or 3 matchups for me that have really caught your eye.
Well, of course, Jaguars Colts. I think the eyes of the nation will be descending on Indianapolis, Indiana at noon on Sunday. Jags are up to 5-point favorites on the road, by the way. We'll be addressing that in my weekly Circa Million video. You can keep an eye out for that on the RotoWire YouTube channel later this week. But I think we have to start with what to me is maybe not the extremely obvious game of the week, but to me the most intriguing matchup. Bills Jets is on the list as well. Dolphins Chargers, Jeff, in the afternoon window on Sunday. Over under 51. I believe that is the highest on the board. 54 is the number for Lions Chiefs. But if we're talking Sunday games, that's easily the highest. The only game over 50. This has potential to be a monster shootout. Tua versus Herbert. I think the narrative speaks for itself on that side. I think these are 2 of what could be the 3 or 4 best passing offenses in the entire league. We'll see if the Chargers have reformed themselves as a rushing defense whatsoever. But storylines abound here, and 2 teams that I think that are kind of fighting for credibility in that second tier in the AFC.
Yeah, we saw this matchup last year, and it was offensively disappointing a little bit. And I think that's partly because of the play calling, partly because of the personnel at the time. But the Dolphins came out and threw the ball 3 straight incompletes to start the game on that one there when the Chargers were at a historic low in terms of ability to stop the run. They eventually turned it. Like I had Jeff Wilson going in some leagues at that point too, and I was like, yes, Jeff Wilson's been, Mostert's hurt. Wilson's going to be the guy, and then it just didn't happen. Some storylines from that game, I'm kind of curious to see. Like, does Mostert get like a lot? Does he get 15 to 20 touches? How important? How involved is Devon A-Chain? Or are they going to Are they truly going to Salvon Ahmed as the backup, the number 2 guy there? I'm kind of I'm really kind of curious to see that on the Charger side. They're saying it's not going to be the rookie Quentin Johnson as the number 3. Instead, they're saying it's going to be Josh Palmer. Is this a smokescreen, or are they really kind of concerned about Johnson's inability to catch the ball in the preseason?
I wouldn't. It's somewhere in the middle to me. I don't think they're super concerned about Quentin Johnston. I think he'll be just fine. I think it's maybe more of an endorsement of Josh Palmer, who has kind of been like this pre-breakout player for the last few years, and somebody that they've certainly hoped would take a step forward. Now, if you're taking a receiver like Johnston in the first round, you're hoping that he's going to contribute right away. So it's certainly not a good sign by any means, but I remain a fan of Quentin Johnston. I think he'll be just fine. We've seen some pretty big name receivers struggle relatively in the preseason and end up kind of getting things figured out as their rookie years go along. I think Jamar Chase is probably the best example of that. So it was going to be a unique situation for Johnston regardless, because it's not often that you have a first round receiver stepping in as like at best the clear number 3 in what should be a really good offense. So I think the Chargers kind of have the luxury of bringing him along a little bit more slowly that other teams taking a receiver in the first round don't necessarily have.
Yeah. And the other issue too is the Vic Fangio defense. I'm kind of curious to see how much tougher this defense really is. How quickly can he exact his changes? I mean, they have a lot of like draft capital, a lot of financial capital invested in that defense. Obviously, losing Jalen Ramsey before the first snap of the year really does hurt. But it's a like Bradley Chubb in full first season. Like what sort of havoc is he going to wreak? This is. I feel like the under is the play here. I guess it's a way of getting at here, but we'll see.
Yeah, I have to put more research into that one. I love the case for the over as well. I mean, like you said, last year we kind of thought we were getting this firework game, and that was not necessarily the case. But I think both these defenses, especially the Chargers, can be vulnerable early on, and certainly we know what this Dolphins offense is capable of with Tua healthy, and we know he's healthy to begin the year. So I think we actually see quite a few points here. I'll highlight a couple more games that we could get out of here. I know you got to run, and so do I. Packers Bears goes without saying. This is the first time in forever that the Packers have a real question mark at quarterback, and we're not talking about just Aaron Rodgers broke his collarbone and in comes Matt Flynn. Let's see what he looks like. I mean, this is a completely new era. Aaron Rodgers is not coming back, and Green Bay now moves into a state of unknown that they have not had in 20 or 30 years. So Jordan Love looked great in the preseason. I think there's reason to believe that he could be the next guy. There's also reason to believe that he could not be. And this was a disastrous pick that kind of derailed your relationship with your star quarterback and ultimately, cost you some pretty good chances to win a Super Bowl. So it's kind of a high risk, high reward situation here still for Green Bay, even as Jordan Love, has had multiple years on this roster. But I am very, very excited to see what he looks like, not just in week 1, but in this specific environment. I mean, going on the road to Soldier Field, this is the most optimism that the Bears have had in a very long time. And I think they're going to be out for blood, right? I mean, part of the reason they're optimistic is Aaron Rodgers is no longer the quarterback for your arch rival.
Yeah, Bears were beating the Packers pretty comfortably in the second game of the year until Rodgers let an epic comeback. Well, until the Bears gave it to him too. I mean, there was some miscues a lot by the Bears, including by Fields in that game too. So I'm kind of curious to see if they can redeem themselves and all that one there. Uncle Ted asked, when's the last time the Packers had a bad quarterback? Don Majkowski, really, the Magic Man. You don't even remember
even alive for that. Yeah, I don't. Yeah. Being from Wisconsin, being from Green Bay, like I've never experienced a quarterback controversy in my entire life.
It's like Pittsburgh having a coach controversy. It just doesn't happen. It's just, and even like when the Packers were bad when I was a kid, like Lynn Dickey was the quarterback. He was still a decent quarterback. I mean, they really didn't have too many weird years at quarterback there. It's kind of funny. I'll highlight a couple matchups that I like too. I would say San Francisco, Pittsburgh is the one to me that I think is very intriguing. I think there's some very interesting storylines there, including the renewed optimism in Pittsburgh, the quarterback situation with the Niners. I mean, they made their decision. They washed their hands of Trey Lance. They acknowledged an error and moved on. But they're really, truly all in on Brock Purdy. I mean, let's face it, Sam Darnold's not really a threat. I know they think that they could do anything. They could turn Darnold into something decent. He beat out Lance, but is Purdy fully recovered from that elbow injury, for that matter, too? I mean, he's a snap limit in practice every week, a throw limit. Year two, when everybody has tape on him now, pro tape on him, that is, and against a really tough Pittsburgh defense on the road in week one. I think this is kind of a interesting game because, I mean, and the Niners are also still haven't signed Nick Bosa yet. Will they do that by opening day? I don't know, but I got to say, I mean, this is the Niners are presumed to be one of the two NFC favorites, but they have this two huge, massive question marks at quarterback and Bosa.
I would not be surprised at all if Pittsburgh wins this game, especially with it being at Pittsburgh. If it was at San Francisco, I'd probably feel a little bit differently. But yeah, all the questions you brought up with regard to the 49ers are valid. I agree with you that I don't think Sam Darnold is necessarily a true threat to Brock Purdy, but I also don't think the 49ers would be scared to go to Darnold. I think Purdy would have to play his way out of that starting job. But, I think they feel pretty comfortable with what Darnold could give them, probably similar to how Brock Purdy played down the stretch last season. But yeah, I mean, for a team that, roster wise is as good as any in the NFC, to still once again have that same question that's kind of hung over this franchise for as long as they've been in this Shanahan run. They have not fully solved the quarterback question. And look, maybe by week 4 or week 5, Brock Purdy picks up where he left off last season, and he's the guy. And he's kind of the next late round quarterback to ascend to stardom. Like that's very much in the cards, and I think that's the path that the 49ers hope this season takes. But I don't think we could pencil that in by any means. And this is a really, really tough matchup to begin the year. Again, if this game was in San Francisco, I think you'd feel a lot better about it. But having to travel to Pittsburgh, we saw what that defense could be when everybody was healthy last season. They should be healthy to begin the year. There's a lot more optimism about this Steelers offense. Niners are 2.5-point favorites on the road. At the very least, that's a stay away for me, and I might even take Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one there too. In fact, I think Pittsburgh might win outright. Although, I mean, loath to underestimate the Niners, but I also think the Niners are one of those teams that kind of figures it out halfway through every season too. I think they're the team that struggles early and like what you do, you see all these think pieces on what's wrong with the Niners, and then they rip off 8 in a row or something like that. But right. I do think this is a dangerous game for the Niners also. I'm also obviously intrigued in Bengals Browns. We've talked a decent amount on that. I do think it's a trap game. Burrow never plays well against the Browns, so that's something I'm really concerned about. But then the obvious one too, we got to talk Bills Jets. I mean, this is obviously a really big game. For the division, they had 2 wars last year. Josh Allen got banged up a little bit last year in one of those games against the Jets. And now they have the Jets have a real quarterback. Last year they did not. So this is obviously another one where we're kind of really watching this one and intrigued to see how it plays out.
Yeah, like I said, if it's not Dolphins Chargers, I think this is the game of the week for obvious reasons. Not surprised that it gets the Monday night billing. We're seeing Buffalo as 2.5-point favorites on the road. Maybe a little generous, but I understand it. I think the Jets still, kind of have some questions to answer in terms of, okay, how does Aaron Rodgers translate this to real life play on the field? It's one thing to kind of win the offseason, but you actually have to prove it before you fully get that respect. And I love this Jets defense. I like this roster overall. I still have some questions, about the skill position players. They have no real tight end to speak of. You have a lot of uncertainty in that receiver core beyond Garrett Wilson. So I don't know that Aaron Rodgers made this like massive leap from a sinking ship in Green Bay to this, ultra talented team in the New York Jets. I don't think this is exactly like Brady going down to Tampa Bay with this ready-made Super Bowl contender, especially in a brutal AFC. So, it's week 1. No matter what happens here, neither of these teams are going to be panicking, but this is actually kind of a huge game, right? I mean, not only for the division, but just for AFC positioning, because you can't afford a slow start in this AFC. I mean, there are so many good teams, so many teams that expect to win 9, 10, 11 games, expect to be in the playoffs, that You got to come out firing right away. I mean, whoever loses this game is already going to be in kind of a small hole to begin the year. And with a conference that's this top heavy, that's actually really meaningful.
Indeed. What's your prediction on this game?
I'm going to take the Bills. I was telling John on the sports betting pod last week that, I'm with him. He's really down on Buffalo. He doesn't think they're winning the division. Like, I think they regress. I agree with the general consensus that maybe they take a step back, but they were a 13-14 win team last season. They played one fewer game than the rest of the league. I think they could still regress and be like an 11 or 12 win team and be really good. I still think they have the highest floor of any team in this division. I still think they have the better offensive weapons than the Jets do. So I actually think we get a lower scoring, kind of ugly game where neither offense looks great, but I'll take the Bills to win, something like 23-20.
All right. Very good. I'm going to take the Jets. It kills me to say that too, because I'm not a fan, but I think no Von Miller is going to be more impactful than people realize. I think when they lost him, it completely changed the texture of their defense last year in their pass rush. So, I could be wrong about that, but we'll see. But I have some Jet skepticism, but I do think that defense is really pretty wicked. So we'll see what happens there. All right. I think that's going to wrap it up. Is there any other game you want to talk about, or are we good?
I think that's about it. I mean, honestly, like I'm intrigued by every game here. Maybe that's just me being a football fan, but like Titans Saints to me is kind of a sneaky good game in the early window. Obviously Panthers Falcons, I'm really excited to see what Bijan Robinson looks like. I'm excited to see what Bryce Young looks like in his first game, but this is dangerous territory. I don't want to start going game by game. It's going to be like 15 minutes of me rambling. So we'll put it off here.
We'll save that for next week when we're reviewing the games. Yes.
I do have an important keeper question to ask you. This is for my fiance's family league. So my respectability as a son-in-law is on the line here. I could keep any of these three players for my final round pick. So I don't even know, 15th or 16th round. They're basically free. Do I keep Kenneth Walker, Isaiah Pacheco, or Evan Ingram?
You keep Walker. I think there's a lower ceiling to what Pacheco could be because I just don't see him that involved in the passing game. And it's either one of the two backs. I know you got some Jaguars love for Evan Ingram, but you can always just re-add him in the draft. Kenneth Walker for me. I don't think it's Walker is interestingly enough slipped in my primetime draft, but I still think he's pretty transparently the guy. Okay, there we have it. Kenneth Walker over Pacheco. I have not made my final call, but I will inform you of what that decision is later today. We'll be waiting with bated breath. Good luck on that. Yes, indeed. So, and I'm looking forward to seeing your NFFC results. So it should be a busy night for you. Big thanks to everybody jumping in. A very active chat room today. Really appreciate that. Thanks everybody for jumping in with us. And if you weren't listening live, thanks for listening on the podcast later on. We got Jake and Joe coming up, and we're starting our regular in-season schedule. They'll be talking about guys that you can add this week. If you did an early draft, there's a lot of free agents. I did sneaky ads with Alan Soslowski, too. You can check that out on video as well. Thanks for listening to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Take care.